The sound of the auctioneer's gavel cut through the dusty air like a gunshot, silencing the murmurs of the crowd gathered in Cripple Creek, Colorado's town square on that sweltering August day in 1885. Ruby Carson stood with her shoulders squared and her chin high despite the rope binding her wrists, her emerald eyes blazing with defiance as men in dusty boots and worn hats appraised her like livestock. At 22, Ruby had never imagined she would end up on an auction block. Beside her stood her sisters Rachel, 20, and Rosalie, 18, their faces pale against their dark hair, family resemblance unmistakable in their high cheekbones and slender builds. The three Carson sisters, orphaned and falsely accused of theft, now faced the frontier justice of a corrupt town. "Three fine women," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the square. "Young, healthy, and educated. Rare finds in these parts. Who'll start the bidding?" Ruby's stomach twisted as men called out offers. Her mind raced with plans of escape, though she knew attempting it would only make things worse for her sisters. They had been inseparable since their parents died of typhoid 2 years ago. Now, they might be torn apart, sold to different men for different purposes. A commotion at the edge of the crowd drew Ruby's attention. A tall figure pushed through the throng of onlookers, the late afternoon sun glinting off the silver spurs on his boots. His broad shoulders were draped in a dust-covered duster, and a worn Stetson shaded piercing blue eyes. "$500, the man called, his voice deep and resolute. The crowd fell silent. $500 was an outrageous sum, enough to buy a decent plot of land. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "500 for which one, mister?" The stranger's gaze swept over Ruby and her sisters, his expression unreadable. "All three." Murmurs erupted through the crowd. The auctioneer sputtered, "Sir, that's not how this works." The stranger reached into his coat and produced a leather pouch. "I said 500 for all three." "That's more than fair." "I've got 600 for the oldest one," called a paunchy man with whiskey on his breath. Without hesitation, the stranger countered, 800 for all three." Ruby exchanged glances with her sisters. Rachel's eyes were wide with fear, and Rosalie trembled visibly. Who was this man, and what did he want with them? The auctioneer, sensing the crowd's unrest, tried to regain control. "Gentlemen, please, we must proceed with $1,000. The stranger interrupted, dropping the pouch onto the auction table with a heavy thud. "In gold. For all three sisters, right now." A hush fell over the square. $1,000 was a small fortune in Cripple Creek. The auctioneer licked his lips, greed overcoming his adherence to procedure. He quickly counted the contents of the pouch, his eyes widening. "Sold." To the gentleman in the back. Relief and terror warred within Ruby's chest. They would stay together, but at what cost? What did this mysterious stranger want with three young women? The man strode forward, his spurs jingling with each step. As he approached the auction block, Ruby got her first clear view of his face, strong-jawed, with a thin scar running along his left cheek, and eyes the color of a mountain lake. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with streaks of silver at his temples that spoke of a hard life. "Isaac Everett," he introduced himself quietly as the auctioneer untied their bonds. "I own the Double E Ranch outside of town." Ruby had heard of the Double E, a prosperous cattle operation that supplied beef to the mining camps scattered throughout the mountains. Its owner was reputed to be fair but private, rarely venturing into town. "Why?" Ruby whispered, rubbing her chafed wrists. "Why would you pay so much for us?" Isaac Everett's gaze softened slightly. "Let's discuss that somewhere more private. My wagon's this way." The sisters followed him through the dispersing crowd, ignoring the jealous glares and crude remarks from men who'd been outbid. Ruby positioned herself between her younger sisters and these hungry stares, her body tense and ready to fight despite their apparent rescue. Isaac's wagon waited at the edge of the square, a sturdy buckboard with a team of matched bay horses. He helped each sister up onto the bench with unexpected gentleness before taking the reins. As they pulled away from town, Ruby found her voice. "Mr. Everett, I appreciate your purchase, but I need to know your intentions." Isaac kept his eyes on the road ahead. "My intentions, Miss Carson, are to give you and your sisters something rare in this world, a choice." Rachel leaned forward. "A choice?" "Yes." He guided the horses around a bend in the road. "I bought your freedom, not your servitude. Once we reach my ranch, you can decide what path you want to take." Rosalie, always the most suspicious, scoffed. "Men don't pay $1,000 for nothing in return." Isaac nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. "The way I see it, I've paid a debt that wasn't mine. What happened to you three wasn't right. I've got a big ranch that needs various kinds of help, but I won't force anyone to stay who doesn't want to." Ruby studied his profile, searching for deceit and finding none. "And if we choose to leave?" "I'll provide you with funds to start over elsewhere," he said simply. "Though I'd advise against returning to Cripple Creek." The sisters exchanged glances, communicating in the silent language they'd developed over years of shared hardship. None of them fully trusted this stranger, but his offer seemed genuine, and they had few alternatives. As the wagon rumbled on, the town receded behind them, and the vast landscape of the Colorado Territory opened before them, rolling foothills rising to meet the distant peaks of the Rockies, painted gold by the setting sun. Despite her wariness, Ruby felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The Double E Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling property nestled in a verdant valley, with a large two-story main house, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures dotted with cattle. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods. "It's beautiful," Rachel murmured, her artist's eye appreciating the landscape. Isaac nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. "My father started with nothing but a claim and a dream. Took 20 years to build it to this." "And now it's yours," Ruby observed. "For the past 5 years," Isaac confirmed as he guided the wagon toward the house. "Since Pa died." The wagon rolled to a stop before the main house, and a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair emerged onto the porch. "You're late for supper, Isaac," she called, then paused when she saw the sisters. "I see you've brought company. Mrs. Hawkins, this is Ruby, Rachel, and Rosalie Carson." Isaac introduced them as he helped the sisters down from the wagon. "They'll be staying with us for a while. Ladies, this is Mrs. Hawkins, my housekeeper and the best cook in Colorado Territory." Mrs. Hawkins looked them over with shrewd eyes but kind expression. "You poor dears look half-starved. Come inside and get washed up. There's stew keeping warm on the stove." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, simple but well-furnished, with polished wooden floors covered by colorful rugs and walls adorned with landscape paintings. A large fireplace dominated the sitting room, and the smell of fresh bread and beef stew permeated the air. After weeks of jail food, the meal was heavenly. Ruby watched her sisters eat with the enthusiasm of the truly hungry while she tried to understand their situation. Isaac Everett was unlike any man she'd encountered. He spoke little during the meal, occasionally answering Mrs. Hawkins's questions about ranch business, but otherwise seemed content to let the housekeeper fuss over their unexpected guests. When the dishes were cleared, Isaac finally addressed the sisters directly. "Mrs. Hawkins has prepared the guest rooms upstairs. Tomorrow, after you've rested, we can discuss your options." Ruby found her voice. I think we'd prefer to know our options now, Mr. Everett. Isaac nodded, respecting her directness. Fair enough. My ranch needs help of various kinds, Mrs. Hawkins could use assistance with the house and cooking, especially with Roundup coming. The foreman's wife runs a small school for the ranch children and could use a teacher's assistant. And I've been thinking of expanding our garden and perhaps adding some chickens and dairy cows enterprises that require dedicated attention. You're offering us jobs, Rachel said, sounding surprised. With fair wages, room and board, Isaac confirmed. Or, as I said before, if none of that appeals, I'll provide you with enough money to make a fresh start elsewhere. Rosalie narrowed her eyes. What's the catch? Isaac met her gaze directly. No catch, Miss Rosalie, but no illusions either. Ranch life is hard work. The winters are harsh, and the comforts are few compared to city living. But it's honest work, and you'll be treated with respect. Ruby studied him, trying to reconcile this generous offer with her experience of men's motives. Why would you do this for 3 strangers? For the first time, Isaac looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Mrs. Hawkins, who nodded slightly before excusing herself from the room. 5 years ago, he began, his voice low, my sister found herself in a similar situation in a town near Denver. Accused of a crime she didn't commit, sold to pay for court costs, the man who bought her. He paused, his jaw tightening. She didn't survive the winter. The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I'm sorry, Ruby said softly. Isaac nodded once. I couldn't help her, but I can help you 3. He stood, his expression composed once more. Rest tonight. Think about what you want. We'll talk more tomorrow. That night, in the comfort of a real bed for the first time in weeks, Ruby and her sisters whispered together, weighing their options. I don't trust him, Rosalie insisted. No man is this generous without wanting something in return. Rachel, always the optimist, disagreed. You heard about his sister. He understands what we've been through. What do you think, Ruby? They both asked, deferring to their oldest sister as they had since childhood. Ruby stared at the moonlight streaming through the window. I think we should give it a chance, at least for now. We have nowhere else to go and he seems honorable. I saw how he looked at you, Rosalie said with a knowing smile. Ruby shook her head. He was looking at all of us, and after what we've been through, I'm not interested in any man's attention. But as she drifted off to sleep, Ruby couldn't deny that Isaac Everett's piercing blue eyes and unexpected kindness had stirred something within her that she thought had died alongside their parents. The next morning brought clarity and purpose. Over breakfast, each sister announced her decision. I'd like to help with the school, Rachel said, her love of children and education making this choice natural. Rosalie, practical and hardworking, chose the garden and livestock expansion. I've always had a way with animals, she explained, and I enjoy watching things grow. When all eyes turned to Ruby, she straightened her shoulders. I'll assist Mrs. Hawkins with the household management, she decided, knowing her organizational skills would be valuable there. But she had another request. I'd also like to learn about the ranch operations. The business side of things. Isaac raised an eyebrow but nodded. That can be arranged. I keep the books in my study. You're welcome to review them. And so began the Carson sisters' new life at the Double E Ranch. The days fell into a rhythm, hard work from dawn until dusk, but satisfying work that produced tangible results. Rachel thrived at the small schoolhouse, her natural patience and creativity winning over even the most reluctant students. Rosalie's garden flourished under her care, and she developed a special rapport with the animals, especially a temperamental milk cow that wouldn't let anyone else near her. Ruby divided her time between helping Mrs. Hawkins managed the large household and learning the business of ranching from Isaac. She discovered he was not only a skilled cattleman, but also a shrewd businessman, diversifying the ranch's interests to include timber harvesting and even a small mining operation. As summer faded into autumn, Ruby found herself looking forward to their evening sessions in his study. Isaac proved to be well-read and thoughtful, willing to explain every aspect of the operation and genuinely interested in her suggestions. "You have a good head for business, Miss Carson," he remarked one evening as they reviewed the quarterly accounts. "Ruby," she corrected him. After 2 months she felt they had moved beyond formalities. "And thank you. My father was a banker before he caught gold fever. He taught me mathematics and bookkeeping from an early age." Isaac's expression softened at the mention of her father. "You must miss them. Your parents." Ruby nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "Every day. They were good people. They didn't deserve what happened to them." "What did happen?" Isaac asked gently. "If you don't mind my asking." Ruby rarely spoke of it, but something about the quiet intimacy of the study, with rain pattering against the windows and a fire crackling in the hearth, loosened her reserve. "They came west when I was 15, chasing rumors of gold in the mountains. Father wasn't a skilled prospector, but he was determined. For years, we scraped by on what little he found and Mother's sewing. Then 2 years ago, they both fell ill with typhoid. There wasn't enough money for a doctor for both of them." Her voice caught. "They died within days of each other." Isaac's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of comfort that sent warmth up her arm. "I'm sorry." Ruby drew a steadying breath. "Afterward we had nothing. No claim, no money. We took jobs in Cripple Creek, Rachel and I as seamstresses, Rose Alley as a laundress. We were saving to move east, to my mother's sister in Boston. Then the mayor's wife claimed her diamond brooch was stolen. We were the obvious suspects, 3 sisters with no family, no connections." "But you didn't take it," Isaac said. "It wasn't a question." "Of course not," Ruby replied, indignation flaring. "We were raised better than that, but it didn't matter. The marshal searched our room and found the brooch hidden in Rachel's trunk. We were set up, but who would believe us over the mayor's wife?" Isaac's expression darkened. "I've heard similar stories about Cripple Creek's leadership. Corruption runs deep there. The judge gave us a choice: jail or indenture to pay for the stolen property and court costs. We chose indenture, thinking it would at least keep us together." Ruby's laugh was hollow. "We were naive. The auctioneer made it clear we would be sold separately to whoever paid the most." "Until I arrived," Isaac said quietly. Ruby met his gaze. "Why were you in Cripple Creek that day?" "Fate, perhaps," he said with a slight smile. "Or good timing. I was there to meet with a lumber buyer. The auction was happening as I was leaving town." Ruby studied his face, noting the tiny lines around his eyes, the way his brow furrowed when he was thinking deeply. "Most men would have walked on by." "I'm not most men," Isaac replied simply. The truth of that statement hung in the air between them. Ruby had learned over the past months that Isaac Everett was indeed unlike any man she had ever known. Beneath his reserved exterior lay a deep well of compassion and integrity. He treated everyone on the ranch with respect, from Mrs. Hawkins to the youngest stable boy. He worked alongside his men during roundup and never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. And he had kept his word to the sisters. They received fair wages, kept in an account he had opened for them in the bank in the nearby town of Fairplay. They were free to come and go as they pleased, though none had chosen to leave. As autumn deepened into winter, the rhythms of ranch life changed. The cattle were brought down from the high pastures, the garden was put to bed under a layer of straw, and the household turned inward. Evenings were spent around the fire, with Mrs. Hawkins teaching the sisters to knit, Rachel reading aloud from novels, and occasionally, Isaac playing the fiddle his grandfather had brought from Scotland. It was during one such evening, with snow falling thickly outside, that Ruby realized she had come to think of the Double E as home. The realization both comforted and alarmed her. They had built a life here, yes, but it was a life dependent on one man's goodwill. What if that changed? Her thoughts must have shown on her face, for Isaac approached her later as she stood by the window, watching the snowflakes dance in the light from the porch lantern. "You seem troubled tonight," he said, standing beside her but not too close, always respectful of her space. Ruby hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was thinking about the future, about what happens when, if, your kindness runs its course." Isaac frowned. "My kindness, as you call it, isn't something that expires, Ruby. Everything changes, Mr. Everett." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "And yes, things change. But my offer to you and your sisters remains. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." Ruby turned to face him fully. "And what if what I want changes?" Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, hope, perhaps, or apprehension. "Then you should pursue whatever makes you happy." Their conversation was interrupted by Rosalie calling for Ruby's opinion on the pattern she was knitting, and the moment passed. But Ruby found herself thinking about it late into the night. What did she want? Security, certainly. Independence. But increasingly, she also wanted something she had never expected to desire again after their parents' death's connection. Belonging. Family. The winter of 1885-1886 was particularly harsh in the Colorado mountains. Blizzards isolated the ranch for weeks at a time, and keeping the livestock alive required constant vigilance. Ruby found herself working alongside Isaac more frequently as the household pulled together to weather the storms. It was during one such blizzard, when Isaac and several ranch hands had been out since dawn checking on the cattle, that Ruby's feelings crystallized. The men had been gone too long, and as darkness fell with no sign of them, worry gnawed at her. Mrs. Hawkins tried to reassure her. "Isaac knows these mountains better than anyone. He'll bring them home safe." But when the kitchen door finally burst open near midnight, revealing Isaac carrying one of the younger hands, his face blue with cold, Ruby's heart nearly stopped. "Frostbite," Isaac explained tersely as they cleared the kitchen table. "Jimmy here got separated in the whiteout. Found him just in time." The next hours were a blur of activity as they worked to save Jimmy's life and limbs. Ruby moved efficiently beside Isaac, following his instructions, providing hot water, blankets, and the whiskey he used to disinfect his knife when they had to lance the worst of the frostbitten areas. When Jimmy was finally stabilized, his color improving and his body warming, Ruby noticed that Isaac himself was shaking with exhaustion and cold. "Your turn," she said firmly, leading him to a chair by the kitchen fire and pressing a mug of hot coffee into his hands. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Isaac accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "You handled yourself well tonight. Not everyone can stay calm in a crisis." Ruby shrugged. "I've had practice." She began examining his hands, checking for signs of frostbite. His skin was rough and calloused from years of ranch work, but his fingers were long and surprisingly elegant. "You should take better care of yourself," she chided softly. "Is that concern I hear, Miss Carson?" Isaac asked, a rare teasing note in his voice despite his exhaustion. Ruby met his eyes. "Yes," she admitted simply. "I would be very distressed if anything happened to you." The admission hung between them, more revealing than she had intended. Isaac's expression softened, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather-light. "I'll be more careful," he promised. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Hawkins returning to check on Jimmy, but something had shifted between Ruby and Isaac. an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day in Cripple Creek. As winter slowly yielded to spring, those feelings continued to develop. Ruby found Isaac watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his gaze warm and appreciative but never presumptuous. For her part, she discovered new reasons daily to admire him: his patience with Rachel's endless questions, his willingness to try Rosalie's experimental garden crops, his fairness in dealing with a dispute between two ranch hands. It was Rachel who finally confronted her about it one April evening as they walked by the creek, now swollen with snowmelt. "You're in love with him," Rachel stated matter-of-factly. Ruby nearly stumbled. "With whom?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "With the ranch dog. Who do you think?" "Isaac, of course." Ruby started to deny it, then sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you as well as I do," Rachel assured her. "And to Rosalie and Mrs. Hawkins, and probably half the ranch hands," Ruby groaned. "Wonderful." "The real question," Rachel continued, linking her arm through Ruby's, "is what are you going to do about it? Because in case you haven't noticed, the man is head over heels for you too." Ruby frowned. "That's ridiculous. Isaac sees us as his responsibility, nothing more." Rachel stopped walking and turned to face her sister. "Ruby Carson, for someone so intelligent, you can be remarkably obtuse. The way Isaac looks at you isn't the way a man looks at a responsibility. It's the way Pa used to look at Ma, like you're the sun, and he's lucky just to be in your orbit." Ruby's heart stuttered at the comparison. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, it's complicated. He's our employer, our benefactor. So, that was months ago. We've earned our keep since then. The accounts he set up for us have enough that we could leave tomorrow and start over somewhere else if we wanted." Rachel squeezed her sister's hands. "But none of us want to. This is home now, and Isaac is a big part of why." Ruby couldn't argue with that. The thought of leaving, the double E of leaving Isaac, created a physical ache in her chest. "I don't know what to do, Rachel," she admitted. "I never expected to feel this way about anyone." "Maybe you don't have to do anything," Rachel suggested. "Maybe just be honest about how you feel. See where it leads." Being honest with herself was one thing, being honest with Isaac was another matter entirely. Ruby spent the next several days gathering her courage, rehearsing what she might say. But the right moment never seemed to present itself. Isaac was busy with spring calving, often returning to the house long after everyone else had gone to bed. Then, unexpectedly, the decision was taken out of her hands. It happened during the first cattle drive of the season. A small herd needed to be moved to the north pasture, and Isaac had invited Ruby to ride along, knowing she'd been practicing her horsemanship. The day was perfect, clear blue skies, the mountains still snow-capped, but the valleys lush with spring growth. Ruby felt a sense of freedom on horseback that she'd never experienced before. They had just gotten the cattle settled in the new pasture when a rattlesnake spooked Ruby's horse. The mare reared suddenly, throwing Ruby before bolting. Ruby hit the ground hard, the air knocked from her lungs. As she struggled to breathe, she heard the unmistakable rattle of the snake, much closer now. Before she could move, Isaac was there, placing himself between her and the snake. With one fluid motion, he drew his revolver and fired, killing the rattler instantly. "Ruby, are you hurt?" His voice was tight with concern as he knelt beside her. Ruby managed to shake her head, still fighting to regain her breath. "Just winded," she gasped. Isaac's hands moved gently over her limbs, checking for injuries. Finding none, he helped her to a sitting position, supporting her back until her breathing normalized. "I thought," for a moment there. He began, then stopped, his expression raw with an emotion Ruby had never seen so clearly on his face before. "I'm fine," she assured him, reaching up to touch his cheek. Thanks to you. Isaac captured her hand in his, turning it to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture sent a jolt of warmth through Ruby's entire body. I don't know what I would have done if anything happened to you, he confessed, his voice low. Ruby, she didn't let him finish, closing the distance between them and pressing her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he seemed shocked. Then he was kissing her back, one hand cradling her face with exquisite tenderness while the other arm wrapped around her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless for entirely different reasons than minutes before, Ruby felt a smile spread across her face. I've been wanting to do that for months, she admitted. Isaac's laugh was full of wonder. And I've been wanting you to. His expression grew serious. Ruby, I need you to know that what I feel for you, it has nothing to do with any obligation. From the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, head high despite everything, I was drawn to you. Not out of pity or duty, but admiration. And over these months, that admiration has grown into something much deeper. Ruby touched his face again, tracing the scar on his cheek. I know, I feel it too. I fought against it at first, thinking it was just gratitude, or that you could never see me as anything but someone you rescued. But it's more than that, so much more. Isaac captured her hand again, pressing another kiss to it. I love you, Ruby Carson. I think I've loved you since that first night when you demanded to know your options instead of just accepting what was offered. You're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. Tears sprang to Ruby's eyes at his declaration. I love you too, she whispered, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Their second kiss was deeper, a promise of all that might follow. When they parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. We should head back before they send out a search party. Ruby nodded, though she was reluctant to break the moment. What will we tell everyone? Isaac smiled, helping her to her feet. The truth. That I love you and want to court you properly if you'll have me. Court me, Ruby laughed. Isaac, we've been living under the same roof for 8 months. All the more reason to do things right, he insisted, whistling for his horse, which had stayed nearby unlike Ruby's skittish mare. Your sisters deserve to see that my intentions are honorable, and so do you. As Isaac helped her mount his horse and climbed up behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins, Ruby felt a contentment she had never expected to experience again after her parents' deaths. This man, this land, they had become her home in a way she could never have predicted that day on the auction block. The news of their courtship was met with varying reactions at the ranch. Mrs. Hawkins expressed satisfaction that they had finally come to their senses. Rosalie claimed she had predicted it from the start. Rachel hugged them both, whispering in Ruby's ear, I told you so. The ranch hands accepted it with good-natured ribbing toward their boss, who took it with unusual good humor. Jimmy, recovered from his frostbite with only the loss of 2 toes, declared it about time before returning to his chores. Spring blossomed into summer, and with it, Ruby and Isaac's relationship deepened. He courted her properly, as promised, taking her on picnics by the creek, bringing her wildflowers he found while riding the range, reading poetry to her in the evenings. Though they lived in the same house, they maintained propriety, much to Ruby's occasional frustration and Isaac's evident amusement. Patience, he would murmur when their goodnight kisses grew too heated. Some things are worth waiting for. Ruby wasn't the only Carson sister finding her place in the world. Rachel had become indispensable at the school, developing a special rapport with the children and an increasingly close friendship with the foreman's son, a quiet, bookish young man named Thomas who shared her love of literature. Rosalie's garden had expanded into a proper farm, supplying the ranch with vegetables and now eggs and milk as well. She had revealed an entrepreneurial streak, convincing Isaac to let her sell the surplus in fair play. Her frequent trips to town had brought her into contact with the local blacksmith's apprentice, a strapping young man named Daniel, who seemed equally captivated by Rosalie's fiery spirit and business acumen. One evening in late August, as the first hints of autumn tinged the aspen leaves, Isaac suggested a ride to a ridge overlooking the ranch. As they watched the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson, he turned to Ruby with unusual seriousness. "I brought you here for a reason," he began, taking her hands in his. "This is my favorite spot on the entire ranch. My father brought me here the day he decided I was ready to learn what it meant to be responsible for this land and the people who depend on it." Ruby squeezed his hands, encouraging him to continue. "He told me that a ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's a community, a family." Isaac drew a deep breath. "Ruby, when I rode into Cripple Creek that day, I never imagined I'd find the missing piece of my life on an auction block. But there you were, proud, defiant, and so beautiful it stole my breath." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Ruby's heart began to race. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter back to the Double E. You've challenged me, supported me, and shown me what it means to truly love someone." Isaac opened the box, revealing a ring with a single perfect diamond set in gold. "Ruby Carson, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Ruby's vision. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. Isaac gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise their future held. As they rode back to the ranch to share their news, Ruby marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that auction block to this moment of perfect joy, it seemed almost impossible. The wedding was planned for October, when the aspen would be at their golden peak and the fall roundup completed. Ruby insisted on a simple ceremony, but the entire ranch had other ideas. What began as a small affair grew into a community celebration as everyone contributed their talents, from Mrs. Hawkins's legendary cooking to the bunkhouse cook's surprisingly beautiful calligraphy on the invitations. Rachel designed Ruby's dress, a creation of ivory silk with delicate embroidery that she and Rosalie worked on during the evenings. Isaac, banned from seeing the dress before the wedding, contented himself with building an addition to the main house, a private wing for him and Ruby, with a study for her beside his own. As the wedding day approached, Ruby found herself reflecting on the past year's journey. One evening, she sat with her sisters on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the meadow as twilight deepened. "Do you ever think about that day in Cripple Creek?" she asked them. "How different things might have been?" Rosalie shuddered. "I try not to. But I'm grateful every day for how it turned out." Rachel nodded in agreement. "Isaac gave us more than just freedom. He gave us a chance to choose our own paths. And look where they've led," Ruby mused. Rachel was now officially the schoolteacher, with plans to expand the curriculum. Rosalie's farming operation had grown to include a small orchard, and her courtship with Daniel the blacksmith was progressing steadily. And Ruby herself was about to marry a man she loved beyond measure. "You remember what you said that first night here?" Rachel asked. "When we were deciding whether to stay," Ruby smiled at the memory. "I said we should give it a chance." "Best chance we ever took," Rosalie declared, raising her lemonade glass in a toast. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the mountains etched sharply against a cloudless blue sky. The ceremony was held under the cottonwoods by the creek, their leaves a canopy of gold above the gathered crowd. Ruby, walking between her sisters toward Isaac, felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find again after losing her parents. Isaac's face as he watched her approach was a study in love and wonder. When she reached him, he took her hands in his voice steady as he recited the vows they had written together, promises of partnership, respect, and enduring love. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Isaac's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Ruby knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The path from that auction block to this moment had been unexpected, but it had led her home. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, music and dancing, feasting and laughter filling the ranch with joy. As Ruby and Isaac moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, she caught glimpses of her sisters Rachel deep in conversation with Thomas, their heads bent close together, Rosalie teaching Daniel a lively dance, her face flushed with happiness. "They've found their paths too," Isaac observed, following her gaze. Ruby leaned into his embrace. "Thanks to you." Isaac shook his head. "I just provided the opportunity. You three did the rest yourselves." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I must admit, I had hopes from the beginning that your path might lead to me." "It was always going to," Ruby replied softly. "From the moment you stood up in that crowd and claimed all three of us, my heart recognized you before my head did." Later, as they slipped away from the festivities to the privacy of their new quarters, Isaac drew her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Everett," he murmured against her lips. "I've been home since the day you brought me here," Ruby answered, surrendering to his kiss and the promise of their future together. The years that followed brought changes to the Double E Ranch. Rachel married Thomas the following spring, moving into the foreman's house when Thomas's father retired and passed the position to his son. Their wedding was a smaller affair but no less joyous, with Rachel radiant in a blue dress that matched the forget-me-nots in her bouquet. Rosalie and Daniel took longer to make their commitment official. Rosalie's independent streak and Daniel's determination to establish his own blacksmith shop in Fairplay meant a 2-year courtship before they finally exchanged vows. They chose a practical arrangement, living on the ranch, while Daniel commuted to his shop in town that suited them perfectly. Ruby and Isaac's first child, a son they named William after Isaac's father, arrived exactly 9 months after their wedding, much to Mrs. Hawkins's knowing amusement. He had Ruby's green eyes and Isaac's quiet determination. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later with another son, James, completing their family the year after. Rachel and Thomas had twin girls who kept the schoolhouse lively, while Rosalie and Daniel produced 3 boys in rapid succession, each with their mother's fiery temperament and their father's sturdy build. The cousins grew up together on the expanding ranch, which prospered under the combined talents of the extended family. Ruby's business acumen and Isaac's ranching knowledge proved a formidable combination. They acquired additional land, diversified into sheep as well as cattle, and established the Double E brand as one of the most respected in Colorado. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Isaac had purchased the sisters' freedom. The entire family gathered for a special dinner. As Ruby looked around the table at the faces of those she loved, Isaac at the head, their children beside them, her sisters and their husbands, Mrs. Hawkins still presiding over the kitchen despite her advancing years, and even Jimmy, now the ranch's top hand, she felt overwhelming gratitude. After the meal, as the children played in the yard and the adults relaxed on the porch, Isaac took Ruby's hand and led her toward their special ridge. The walk was familiar now, a path they had taken countless times over the years to discuss important decisions or simply to find a moment of peace together. At the top, as the setting sun gilded the landscape. Isaac wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. 10 years, he marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you standing on that auction block. Other times, it seems like you've always been part of my life. Ruby leaned back against his chest. I can hardly remember a time before the double E before you. Any regrets? He asked, the question light but sincere. Ruby turned in his arms to face him, taking in the familiar beloved features, the silver now more pronounced at his temples, the laugh lines deeper around his eyes. Not a single one. You gave me and my sisters the greatest gift possible, the freedom to choose our paths. And you chose me, Isaac said, wonder still evident in his voice after all these years. Best choice I ever made, Ruby assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. And one I'd make again every day for the rest of our lives. As they stood together on the ridge overlooking the home and life they had built, Ruby thought about the journey from that desperate day in Cripple Creek to this moment of perfect contentment. From 3 frightened sisters on an auction block to a thriving family, bound not just by blood but by love and shared purpose. Isaac had purchased their freedom that day, but what he had really given them was the chance to find where they truly belonged. For Ruby, that place was here in this valley, on this ranch, in this man's arms. It was a path she could never have foreseen, but one she would travel gladly for all her days. Come on, Isaac said, taking her hand as the last rays of sunlight faded from the peaks. Let's go home. And together, they walked down the ridge toward the lights of the ranch house, where family and future awaited.